I'd gone to Princeton. I took all these jobs after Princeton that Princeton people take. Like I worked on Capitol Hill for a while. I worked as a consultant in the insurance industry, which weirdly actually came in helpful later with cyber insurance. I worked in marketing, and each of these jobs just to me was more mind numbing than the last. And so I ended up taking a nighttime adult continuing studies class in writing when I was living in New York, working in marketing at Coach, the handbag company, during the day. And the guy who taught the class was a business journalist. And he said, you know what, you're pretty good at this. I think you should give journalism a shot. But I'd never done anything with journalism. I never worked for a school paper, nothing. So I decided to go to journalism school. I went to Stanford and I took a couple classes at the business school just because that's the benefit of being at Stanford. And I took this business ethics class, and I just remember these CEOs would come in and talk about all the sort of moral decision making that went into their jobs. They had a guy come in who was designing a clinical trial for a new birth control. And he just walked us through, like, what do we do if this fails? Do we pay for the abortion? Do we pay for this kid's, preschool? Like, do we have to pay for their college? And I never thought about business journalism being that interesting. So most of the students I was in that program with went off to cover politics or sports. And I kind of said, I'm going to stick it out with tech journalism. So I got a job at Forbes. I was in New York, and I said, I really want to go back to the Bay Area. I just wanted to be home. So I pitched them on resurrecting the Midas list, which was a huge mistake. This ranking of venture capitalists. And I did that. I had some cover stories because it was 2006, 2007 when, VCs were still kind of like coming out of the doldrums. But things were picking up in the sort of private secondary market for shares of Facebook and Twitter and Uber. And so I started profiling people like Jim Breyer at Excel, and those stories were landing on the front page, and Peter Thiel. And so the New York Times was reading those stories, and they called me up one day and they said, we're looking at you for a job at the Times, but we're not sure you're going to want it. And I said, well, how bad could it be? Because you're the New York Times. And they said, it's cybersecurity. And I just remember like audibly groaning, thinking, oh my God, like I've gone out of my way to know as little about cybersecurity as possible. But sure, like I'll go to the interviews and I'll be perfectly candid about the fact that I'm not your perfect hire here. And I even brought a list of people who covered cybersecurity quite well, in my opinion. So I went out to the Times. I did like 2 days of interviews. They're half hour with like 13 different editors. And I just saw it as this day of like, okay, I'm going to be very honest about the fact I know nothing about cybersecurity, but I'm going to be able to tell my kids one day that I got invited into the building. So I was interviewing the food critic about like, what's your exercise routine? Like, and I also along the way was saying like, oh, by the way, hire these people. They're pretty good. Don't hire me. And at the end, they said kind of two things. One was, wow, you're a really good journalist because you got like the exercise routine out of our food critic. You got like this person to admit this to you. You got this person to admit that. Oh, and by the way, we've actually interviewed everyone on your little list that you brought, and we couldn't understand a damn thing that they were talking about. So congrats, you're hired. And that was kind of my illustrious entry. And then I spent about a year just trying to pair up with, the best of the best white hat hackers like HD Moore, and getting to know people like John Holdquist at Mandiant, and Adam Myers at CrowdStrike, and George Kurtz, and all of them, I think, were actually quite generous with their time. Here I was, this like new person, green person on the beat. And I kind of came to this beat as a non-technical student. Just was like, tell me everything as if I'm your 9-year-old daughter, and people were really generous about that and sort of about mentoring me. But the big thing that happened was the Times getting hacked by China. And that was really like me just getting thrown into the deep end. And it wasn't even assigned to me. I had gotten a tip from someone on our security team that we'd been hacked, and they kind of let me in bed with them. And Mandiant had been brought in, right. And no one really knew Mandiant that well outside the space, but I got to know them really well. And I remember the day the FBI came and, asked us a bunch of questions and then closed their binders and left. And I was just left with this moment of, holy shit, like companies and journalists now have to defend themselves from advanced nation state, Chinese level hackers. Like, what is this? And like, where's the cavalry? The FBI was no help at all. And ultimately, we started talking to Mandiant about calling this out, and the Times let me do that story. That was like a TikTok of our own breach. And that changed the national conversation from one of like victim blaming to no, we all better start talking about Chinese IP theft. And then we did the story with Kevin Mandia on APT1, and that named and shamed the Unit 61398 in Shanghai. And we were sort of off to the races. And every year it was just a different thing. It was just when I thought I had conquered Chinese IP theft, it was Snowden. And then it was, Target and Home Depot and Sony and Saudi Aramco.
By the way, I'm sitting on the other side of this the whole time. And, I was CEO of McAfee, of course, where I had George Kurtz working for me, Stuart McClure, Dmitry Operatovich, a lot of people And then I became chairman of Mandiant, where I had Kevin kind of working for me as chair. And then eventually I became CEO of Fireside. We bought Mandiant. So this whole time period where you're reporting on all these things, I think I have a tattoo that says Unit 61398, by the way, because I was on the other side of that. And I don't know if you know this story, Nicole, but there was the first real breach that we really uncovered at mass scale. You wrote about in your book called Aurora. The second one was called NightDragon. The third one was called Shady Rat. Probably you reported a little less on that, but 3 in a row, all by that Unit 61398, which we had started to see this massive campaign of Chinese espionage and death threats that were going on through my McAfee lens and my Mandiant lens. And you were doing all the reporting. So we were always going, how does she know so much? She seems to have like the inside of everything. You did a tremendous job reporting, I thought, on Aurora and all those reports, just absolutely. What stands out to you, like in your reporting there? Was it the New York Times hack? Was it the unveiling of the unit that was attacking? Like, what jumps out at you? I know you wrote about the Shimon one in Saudi. Like, what one, like, just is your biggest memory? And I'll tell you mine too.
Okay. But I want to ask you one question first, which was like, what was your, if my New York Times getting breached was this moment, like this spider bite moment of, wow, this is what we're up against. What was yours? Was it Aurora? I guess that would have been first.
Yeah, it was Aurora for me because, McAfee and Mandiant, we did a lot of the co-investigation there. And of course, being involved with both companies, I had a chance to really see that from the front line and realize the depth and the breadth of a nation state hacking environment. And you probably know this, I'm pretty public about it. During my FireEye days, we responded to, let me see if I can get that number, 5,572 confirmed IP thefts of American companies. General Alexander called it, and you called it in the book, the greatest wealth transfer in history. Right, happened during my days of McAfee and FireEye. But it goes back to that Aurora one, particularly for me, because we saw over 100 companies with the same APT-like attack, stealing source code, intellectual property, their dwell time measured in months to years in some cases, and just the realization the Chinese were here on big government on commercial attacks just woke me up. Yeah. Did that one do it for you too? Or what one hit you?
For me, it was, when I got there, I think it was Dmitry Alperovich who coined the phrase that then got plagiarized to death. But, he had the phrase first, I think, that said something to the effect of there's only 2 types of companies left in the United States anymore, companies that have been hacked and companies that don't know they've been hacked yet. And I really made it, I just thought that was such a provocative statement. And as a journalist, your instinct is to say, okay, well, that's pretty provocative. I guess it's my job to go find out if it's true. And it wasn't until we were hacked at the New York Times that I got to see, have a front row seat to what that looked like. But what it was, wow, we are not alone here. And no one's talking about this. That was really like the moment for me where I realized, wow, I can't believe this is happening all over the country and everyone is burying it. No one wants their shareholders to know about it. People are talking about the threat in general terms, but none of these victims are stepping out. I think it was actually really shocking to Mandiant that the New York Times was willing to go through with the story. And, small story here is that the day before we went to press, we had kind of an edit meeting, and some of the people on the masthead at the New York Times said, wait a minute, why are we publishing this? What will our competitors say? And I just said, listen, I'm, the most junior person in the room today, but I don't think they're going to say much because I think chances are very high that we are not alone here and that the Journal and the Washington Post have been hacked too. And they said, okay. So sure enough, we published the story. And then it was like, you weren't cool unless you were hacked by APT, 21 or whatever it was. So it was more just this kind of slow unveiling of the evidence that showed that, wow, all of our most vibrant companies, everything that makes the United States the most vibrant economy in the world, the most innovative economy in the world, is being carted off to China, handed to their state-owned enterprises. And we haven't even seen what that's going to do to us. I mean, to this day, I don't think we know what the true impact of just that volume of attacks will have for us. I mean, I always say, like, people are like, what's your next book going to be about? I say, I think I want to go back and find out, where did all the intellectual property go? And like, where are the companies that just ripped it off? And what happened to the companies here that were ripped off? I don't think anyone's done that in a really, clear way yet.
I think you'll get a lot of people help you with that list, by the way,
Right.
including this guy on the other end. And also, we went through a lot of sanctions in the Trump administration on companies that we saw direct benefits, Chinese companies that directly benefited from an IP theft. So there's a lot of places to go, but that point that you're making is incredible, because we're seeing trillion-dollar market cap companies created from the theft of intellectual property of American companies. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is incredible to me to watch. Go back and talk a little bit about, I mean, one part of your book was incredible because I relate to this, almost the physical fear that I started to have as well as a CEO, and the realization I had like armies on the other side that I was combating. And here I am, just the CEO of a company. I didn't really realize what I was up against with, my roles until I started to see it. You also went on the front lines of a lot of situations, reading in your book, landing in Kiev and basically realizing, what you're involved with. And, tell us a little, like, did you feel fear yourself as a reporter? Like, what emotions did you have reporting the way you did?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this a lot. When I had great parents that never said, don't do that, that's too scary. They just said, oh, cool, you had a nice adventure. So I kind of looked at the last 10 years as a great adventure. And I feel like I never really stepped back to think, am I in danger here? And there were a few moments, when I was working on the Times story, it became very clear what they were after. They were after journalist sources. And I remember just having this kind of like paranoid moment where one night my cable box was making outrageously loud sounds in the middle of the night, and I ripped it out. And I even said, like, screw you, China, like, nice try. And the next morning I saw it in like this golden morning light. And I remember just thinking, oh no, like, I'm not letting them hack my head too. I am not going down the tinfoil hat route here. I'm going to just do the best I can to protect my sources. I will take my most sensitive communications offline. I don't even drive to certain meetings because I'm worried the GPS in my car will be tracked. So I'll just do the best I can. And then there are just some things out of my control. And I had some pretty scary moments. I had our security team call me and tell me, someone's on the dark web advertising 6 figures to anyone who can get them into your computer and your phone. And I talk about how in Argentina, I was at this sort of 0-day broker conference, and I come back and my laptop, which was a burner, there wasn't anything on it, had been moved. And then kind of the freakiest one of all, I have to say, I haven't talked about yet. So breaking news here. I got a postcard from the SVR, the Russian, intelligence agency, who was responsible for the SolarWinds hack. So I haven't talked about it yet. I just put it in my book afterward. That's coming out pretty soon. But yeah, I got this postcard, and it was
from Russia with love.
It didn't say that, but it was a weird cartoon that you could tell like there was like something lost in translation. And it was this guy, and it said DNC, New York Times, FireEye, Kevin Mandy, or, something like that. And it's pointing at something else and saying Russia did it. And at first I just thought it was like a return address, Niagara Falls or something like that. I just thought, oh, this is crazy. And how did this person get my address? I take steps to protect it. And my husband was really freaked out by it. And then I realized, I asked around, it was the same postcard that Kevin Mandia had gotten in the time between when they discovered the SolarWinds hack, had attributed it to the SVR, but before they reported it. And, the FBI was investigating whether this was the SVR. So I got a carbon copy of the same postcard. And why are they sending a weird cartoon postcard to my house? I think it's like hey, we know where you live. And, whatever other point they wanted to make there. But, last thing is I have this amazing mentor who was the Moscow bureau chief at the New York Times during the Cold War. And after I did the story on the Times getting hacked by China, I happened to have a lunch scheduled with him that day. And so we went out to lunch, and he said, "Are you scared?" I said, "Maybe a little bit, but, I haven't really had time to process whether I should be." And he would tell me these stories about how the KGB would follow him in Moscow when he was dropping off his kids at preschool. And he said, they never did anything to me. They made it known that they were tailing me. And sometimes we'd even come home from like a day trip and there'd be liquor glasses in the sink. So they let us know that they were watching us and that they'd even come inside our house, but they never did anything to us. And had they done anything, it would have been really an international incident. So I think you need to operate with the same MO. You should assume that they are inside your devices. They know where you live. They'll make some noise sometimes, but if anything were to happen to you in this context, it would be a big incident. So you should operate knowing you have a little bit of armor on you, and you shouldn't be scared, and you shouldn't let it sort of impede what you go and report on. And I'll say the only thing I ever felt like that's too scary was the stuff Brian Krebs does such a great job covering, which is, the spam mafia. And I ended up kind of working around that by covering Brian and profiling Brian. Sony actually optioned the story. I don't think they're going to do anything with it, but just Brian's life, where he gets, swatted, and he gets crap sent to his door, and someone, sets up a grave outside of his house with his name on it. I mean, that stuff is pretty scary, but other than the postcard, it's been pretty tame.
By the way, I have a lot of those similar stories. I'm probably not at liberty to say. I'll just say I can relate quite well. And one I can say that happened to me as well was when I was CEO of FireEye. Several nation states were having a very difficult time sort of getting around our FireEye capabilities. And we were calling out nation states almost on a daily basis. And the extent to which they tried to hack us was incredible. And you learned what you were up against. And that's almost like the New York Times hack itself was at FireEye. They couldn't get outside in hacking. So they couldn't really break down our network or our capabilities in a way that they could get at the source code or reverse engineer FireEye in a way that they could get around us. So instead, they started sending humans. They started sending agents, perfect resumes, unbelievable talented engineers. And of course, we're looking for the best data scientists in the world, the best, threat researchers in the world. And they come in a lot of form factors. And some of these resumes were too good to be true, I'll just say. And ultimately ended up with quite a few arrests, scenarios, escapes to Mexico, almost high-speed chases of people that tried to get employed to the company. Incredible battlefield, this cyber arms race. And, you're writing about this book is, gives me chills because we have a great cyber arms race. And I believe in that. And let's just talk about the here and now for a minute, Nicole, because a lot of what you wrote about, you went to Ukraine, you talked about the playground that Ukraine was for 5, 6, 8 years with Russia and all the taking out of electric grids and banking infrastructure and things. What has surprised you or what has not surprised you with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict? And I'll give you my answer too, but I'm curious in the cyber domain, maybe specifically, what has surprised you or not surprised you about what you're watching, in live theater right now with that conflict?
Well, I think one thing that was a big surprise to most people in cybersecurity is that they didn't do more sabotage on their way in. That they didn't take the grid out, for example, like they did in 2015, 2016. Which not in a like, let's devastate their infrastructure, but more as a psychological weapon. We're coming, we're going to turn your lights out. You better sort of capitulate when we get there. I think that surprised a lot of people. And I think there are interesting theories about why that didn't happen. I think we're obviously seeing that Putin underestimated the Ukrainians. I mean, if I got anything right in my book, it is one sentence that says the Ukrainians are a resilient bunch. He completely underestimated how long it was going to take, if at all, for them to capture Kiev. And, I guess that they thought they were going to be in there to install their puppet government in 48 hours. So maybe they didn't want to take out the power because they would need it running when they got there. That's one theory. Another is when you think back to the NotPetya attack and the boomerang effect there. Here was an attack they launched directly at Ukraine, using a Ukrainian tax software service. It's still an open question whether they intended it to get out. But you have to remember, it did such devastation, $10 billion in damage to companies all over the world, like Merck, like FedEx. And leading up to the invasion, Biden was out there saying, if there are cyber attacks on American infrastructure, we will respond in kind. So, maybe I haven't given this sort of mutually assured digital destruction enough credit. And maybe Putin feared that by launching an attack of that nature, that if it got out, it would trigger more of a direct confrontation with the West that he didn't want to risk in those initial stages. That's option 2. I actually buy into option 3. I think option 3 is just wait. I think the more that we tighten the screws on Russia with sanctions and now the ban on Russian oil and vodka, and diamonds, the less Putin has to lose. And I think the most likely avenue for retaliation against the West is cyber, because as I've been covering for the last 10 years, they already have access. We know they have the capabilities. We've seen them demonstrate the capabilities in Ukraine, on Petro Rabai, a Saudi petrochemical plant where they took out the safety locks. We've seen them do serious damage. And I think at some point, Putin has too much pride to just raise the white flag. I think he's going to want there to be some pain on the other end for what we're doing. And so sort of, I'm just in this waiting period. And so anyways, I want to hear your theory.
No, by the way, Nicole, I can't agree more. I thought you summarized it well. My vantage point here with all the NightDragon things that we do, we have investments in space, air, you name where a threat is. We pretty much have an investment or advisory in that area today. Leading up to sort of the full-on invasion, we had seen a lot of activity in the cyber domain. You saw it with SolarWinds, right? You saw the capability that could be there. You saw we saw a lot of supply chain hits, ransomware oriented, but a lot of strategic ransomware attacks that affected distribution of fuel or capability in the NATO markets that was leading up to the invasion. But there was almost a shock, at least for me, to see how uncoordinated the commands all looked at the time of the invasion. which the cyber command and the air command and the space command and the land command all not fused well together, or at least apparently not looking fused, because I thought we would see this almost blitzkrieg-like attack, take out the electricity, take out the banking. And what did we watch? A denial of service on government websites lasts an hour.
Right.
You know, it was like, you know, barely a squeak when it came to that activity. So it was a little shocking that that hasn't occurred. Meanwhile, to the credit of our administration and our private-public partnerships, we've been able to now use the last few months to harden in a way we've maybe never in history have hardened.
Agreed.
And, you know, I was on a call, you know, 13,000 CISOs with Homeland Security, and I know you're a CISA advisor as well. You know, everybody, you know, 0-day patching, you know, immediate critical advisories to everything, hardening our own infrastructure, knowing reconnaissance was occurring. You know, we created a massive defense moat ourselves, not that we're not vulnerable still, but for the first time, we took an exponential leap in readiness to defend that we had never done before. You would have thought Putin would have created, you know, that window of vulnerability to exploit something. But to your second comment, I think the catastrophe scenario that NotPetya was learned from kept them from doing that. Because the ramifications could have been great, and cyber weaponry is as powerful in some cases as nuclear weaponry can be. And here we are in a scenario where using those weapons wasn't an option yet. But I do think we haven't seen everything yet as well. Pretty incredible environment.
Yeah, and I think just on the information warfare front, I think we really tipped him off balance. I say him because I think this is one man's war. You know, I think this is Putin's war, and I think we tipped him off balance. I mean, it took us, when you think back to NotPetya, it took us a long time to attribute that attack back to the GRU. You know, what happened here was really unprecedented, and just from like a bureaucratic standpoint, almost a miracle for the US to come out and declassify this intelligence that Russia was going to invade Ukraine down to the day they were going to do it. I mean, they were off a couple of days, but I think that's because Xi Jinping made a personal request that they wait until the Olympics were over. But, you know, we called it, and we called it almost to the week. And we announced if there's going to be any cyber attacks, we'll respond. And we attributed everything along the way. And, you know, I think by calling it early, we tipped him off balance. We ensured that he would lose the information war before it even got going. I actually was surprised that he didn't do more to Ukraine to stop people from uploading images of the invasion. Although I think this Viasat hack has not been totally well covered yet. You know, this hack of this European satellite internet provider that was hacked. I think we don't really understand what the full extent of that was or how it was remediated so quickly. But, you know, clearly they've lost the information war already. And I just, I have nothing else to say about it other than I am shocked at the level of public-private collaboration going on right now, not just on the 13,000 person CISO call with CISA, but just the Slack channels that are lighting up, and the direct communication between Microsoft and the White House and Poland, and sending partners to Ukraine, sending Cloudflare and AWS to Ukraine to help them within an hour of their banks and government ministries getting hit with DDoS attacks. I mean, we've never seen that level of coordination in real time before. We've been talking about the need for it for a decade. And for whatever reason, I credit this administration hugely. I mean, I give CISA so much credit. And it's clear this administration has made cybersecurity a priority. I mean, at Biden's first summit with Putin, that was, you know, top of the agenda. So yeah, I think things are finally coming together. I think we're nowhere near where we need to be. And I think ultimately the place I would love to see us get to is to create the digital equivalent of a, you know, cyber Iron Dome, where we can continue to exist and run basic services and innovate while we're hit with hostile activity from all corners. And we're not there yet. We're like decades off from that, unfortunately.
By the way, I can't agree more. And I want to turn to the future here in just a second, but one more comment. I think what I learned in this whole crisis and even the last 2 years, it's been an incredible environment we've been in, since the pandemic and resulting economic crisis, cultural crisis, government crises we've had, just about every crisis hit all at once. And here we are, 2021, as you know, was an all-time record from a threat elevation point of view. You start off your book by defining what a 0 day actually is, which I thought was ironic. 2021 was the highest number of 0 days we'd ever seen. It was actually more than 2 times 2020, just in terms of 0 day exploits that were used in the wild. So we're at a very high threat environment, ransomware attacks, espionage, information warfare, everything. But what did I learn was we need to fuse together our combatant commands, not just with the government, but our enterprises. And the reason for it is because we learned space and cyber are highly connected. Viasat, Starlink, hacks that were occurring there. Our Air Force and our UAVs and drones highly connected to cyber. Our land capabilities highly connected to cyber, terrestrial activities, supply chain, industrial networks, crypto. All these subdomains are highly fused now, and we're learning we have to defend threats from any environment together. Mm-hmm. Because it takes a village there to understand the totality of the problem. And I think almost every company going forward is going to have to think that way because of what we're learning in this event. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll even add a piece of evidence you might not know, which is that I was brought into the Snowden documents. I talk about it in the book. And one thing I didn't mention in the book was that among the documents that were leaked, there was one that really outlined the various Chinese APT groups that the NSA and the GCHQ were tracking. And it talked about their target list. And I remember there were about 3 Chinese APT groups that were just solely dedicated to stealing satellite technology. So there you go. You're right, because clearly the adversary is very interested in what you're talking about. These things can't be divorced from one another.
Let's talk about the future, because I know you're involved with quite a few new things, including a crypto security company, obviously CISA, other things going on. And your book really portended the future here a little bit in terms of what we can see. What's your view? I mean, yesterday we had a crypto stolen over 500 million. I mean, you've covered this thing for 12 years. I mean, $500 million of theft in a single transaction is, we're starting to get records just with that. How do you see the crypto market right now? Just say a few words just about what you're seeing there through I know you're involved with TRM Labs, just a great company as well. What's your thoughts on crypto and the cyber collision? Love to hear that one for a sec.
Well, I've learned a lot from them. So just to back up, I covered Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, obviously, and then the clawback of some of the ransom. And in the process of interviewing various people who specialize in blockchain intelligence, I met Ari and Esteban from TRM Labs. So TRM Labs competes with Chain Analysis and Elliptic. And what was fascinating to me is that Ari, who's high up at TRM Labs, forgive me, Ari, if you're watching this, I forget what your precise title is, but he had come from the Treasury. And so I said to him, don't you think, I mean, we are living in the year of ransomware attacks. Now it's coming for our critical infrastructure. It's coming for our OT systems. Don't you think this is going to be the end of crypto? Don't you think this is going to be the moment that governments put a kibosh on cryptocurrency? Because clearly it's enabling ransomware. I mean, 5 years ago, ransomware attack was, one group hitting your PC and saying, give me the PIN to your e-gift card from the pharmacy for 200 euros. Now it's, give me $50 million in Monero. And if you're going to pay me in Bitcoin, we'll charge a 20% premium. So I kind of just went to Uri and I said, this has to be the end. This can't go on for that much longer after Colonial Pipeline. And he said, what you don't understand is that this is what I did at Treasury. I followed the money. I specialized in financial intelligence and in money laundering. And it would have taken us Nicole, 2.5 years minimum to find the front company in the Seychelles that was holding this account for these Russian cyber criminals who just held up Colonial Pipeline. 2.5 years minimum. And even then, we'd be lucky if we got like 10% of what they were holding. And now with the blockchain, we can track the flow of these funds in real time. There is just unprecedented opportunity for law enforcement in this space. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, listen, every time we've invented a new technology, governments haven't just shut it down. We've just learned how to mitigate the risk in that technology. And what you have to understand is that in this case, yes, there's risk, but ultimately the benefit to law enforcement is greater than the risk here. And you're just starting to see the very, very beginning of some of these cases playing out for law enforcement. So they really shifted my thinking. So when I left the New York Times, they were sort of my first call. And when I had interviewed people inside law enforcement, because one of the things I've been able to develop over the last 10 years is sort of like an amazing due diligence network. And so I'd call up the people who were really their customers. And I said, which of these technologies is panning out for you the most? Where do you see the future? And overwhelmingly, they all said TRM labs. They really had developed, they were a little bit later than their competitors, but that just meant that when they did develop this technology, they developed it as a cross-platform technology, whereas some of their older competitors, really set it up for Bitcoin and then had to tack on these capabilities for other cryptocurrencies. So it was clear to me that they were a much more flexible, adaptive technology. And that was really the future because we were seeing new cryptocurrencies invented almost every month. So so now I'm taking an advisory role with them, but really the reason I've sort of reached out to them is because we are stuck in this ransomware hell right now. Right. And I think that it's clear cryptocurrency has been an enabler. And if they can turn it on its head and basically use this back against cyber criminals, they're going to help solve ransomware. There's no question. And so basically, I'm just sort of I'm calling it this purpose-driven portfolio, but I'm basically picking 4 or 5 companies that don't compete, but I think have, a weapon that is going to take out one of these attack vectors. So they're sort of my ransomware pick. And then
I have about 10 of them for you, Nicole.
Okay,
if you want to choose from NightDragon portfolio, I'll help you. I'll help you pick a few more. By the way, TRM Labs, great company. I wrote a recent blog, maybe worth looking at. I talked about the cyber and crypto collision. And I used the analogy from Batman, you love writing, but I talked about this unstoppable force meeting this immovable object, kind of when Batman met the Joker. But that's what crypto and cyber a little bit are, right? We're seeing this incredible platform of crypto with billions, trillions of dollars now, flowing through it through multiple blockchains. But we have yet to really monitor and manage it from a safety and security point of view. Companies are emerging. We're going to start to see multi-billion-dollar value companies already are in the crypto cyber world. Another one cool called Halburn, Certic. Some of these companies on-chain, all building multi-chain capabilities for monitoring and managing the blockchain and, sort of unveiling the attempted obfuscation that occurs through the blockchain as well, which is helping investigators, create this area. What else are you seeing? I want to get to a couple of questions that are coming in. Any other major areas? I call it the golden age of cyber now because 2021 was one of the biggest years in the history of cyber, from investments, M&A, threat environment, usage of attacks, just almost every number of unicorns. We watched multiple companies reach $50 billion market caps and more. We'll probably see our first $100 billion market cap cyber company coming. Wow. What other areas are you excited about that you're seeing, like crypto?
Well, okay. So I think the biggest unsolved mysteries of the cybersecurity industry is, why can't we address phishing? And why can't we address human behavior? These are the 2 things that continue to be the most common vectors for attacks. And if the cybersecurity industry was going to solve phishing, they should have solved it 20 years ago. It seems like what happened was we got to a level where we were fighting and blocking spam. And then we kind of said, okay, that's good enough. And we never really innovated further than that. But phishing continues to be, the most common vector for most of these APT attacks. So why can't we solve it? So in that space, the company I've gotten really excited about is Abnormal, because they're outsiders. These are guys who were doing ad tech, sold their ad tech company to Twitter. Then we're doing machine learning at Twitter at scale, obviously, just based on Twitter's user base, that said, okay, everyone hates ad tech and everyone hates Twitter. So how do I apply these skills for good? And they said, what about cybersecurity? Why can't we, we basically know everything about your purchasing behavior in ad tech. Why can't we take that same model and apply it to what you do in your inbox? Because 99% of what you do in your inbox is entirely predictable. So we're able to flag abnormal activity. And I love it. I love that model. I love that ad tech guys are going to come in, because as you know, like the most oversold company, promise in cybersecurity has been big data analysis, AI, machine learning. That was like every startup on the RSA floor 10 years ago was promising that. And I would walk the floor with Ashim Chandna from Greylock, and he'd say, yeah, the secret is nobody knows exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's
By the way, I agree with you. The spear phishing thing, it amazes me going back 20 years from the time I started in this business. Spear phishing was the primary point of entry for just about every attack you've covered.
right.
And it still is.
Right.
And, one of the companies I got involved with, and maybe this is an area of passion, is just cyber education, right?
Yeah.
Like something I've learned is like our cyber literacy rate is low in the grand scheme of things by the masses. And, what can we do in the Western world to raise our cyber literacy? Like if you look at our university systems and our state and community, we barely have a cybersecurity degree, more than a handful of universities. So how could we automate the educator, integrate it with the employer, raise literacy much higher, create a national cyber education program, have every university sort of be involved with this? Somewhere we're going to get a cyber ed tech company. We found one called Thrive DX that we love that just automates all that. But boy, does the world need cyber literacy increases, in my opinion, all the reasons you said. Yeah.
I mean, that is what I see as my mission right now that I've left the Times. Like I've written enough about the problem. And I think if I'm guilty of anything, not to go full psychotherapy here, but I think if I'm guilty of anything, it's leaving readers of the New York Times with this impression that cyber is a military problem where there's like digital fighter jets over here and that they have no role to play. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Colonial Pipeline had it happen. Some guy had a crappy password. They didn't have MFA installed. And that's all it took to preempt the shutdown of the major conduit for gas on the Eastern Seaboard. Ridiculous. So yeah, we have a huge cyber education problem. And one thing that Jen Easterly talks a lot about at CISA right now is K through gray cyber education, because, usually it's like your older generation in the enterprise that are the ones that get hit in the phishing exercises. And then we also have just a problem where, kids are coming in and they just click on everything. And sort of the MO is, well, like they're going to get me anyway, so I might as well just get access to all these free services. And so I sort of see this like crazy responsibility on my generation, because I grew up without the internet, without social media, but I was right out of college when Facebook came out. So I'm still sort of a digital native. So the blessings and the curses, and you're not a technophobe, but you understand that there need to be limits to this, and that we really need to hone in on cyber education and telling people not to click on every phishing link that comes their way, and to use a password manager. And MFA would create amazing progress in hardening our defenses. So why aren't we doing it? So some of the other things we're talking about at CISA is creating a cyber core. Part of that would be, this education piece where you bring people who are specialists at this at McAfee or FireEye or at some of the top technology companies like Google and Microsoft into the classroom to talk about this. I mean, I just think there are amazing opportunities in this space. And I think it's just going to take networkers like you and me to basically map this out. But I think we can do it. And I think there's an overwhelming appetite for it right now, like there never has been before.
Yep.
It is, I saw someone in the comments say, you know, I had people read your book and finally they're talking about 0 days. And I love it. I mean, I did a talk with a women's lunch in New Jersey, and they were asking me really sophisticated questions about 0 days after reading my book. So like, I feel like I've done my part here, but I have to do a lot more.
Oh, I love it, Nicole. And you're absolutely right. You know, when I look at the landscape, you know, we have email, which has primarily been the spearfishing route. But what do we have today? We have every other digital channel of communications, right? People are communicating right on the Zoom. We have LinkedIn, we have WhatsApp, we have WeChat, we have Instagram, we have Facebook. There's so many channels now to communicate and get spearfished on, right, that the literacy has to rise, or else we're going to keep falling prey to the same things over and over again. Well, listen, I know we're getting to the top of the hour, or to the bottom of the hour in this case, but I just want to say, God, I'm so honored to talk with you and see you.
Likewise.
You were an inspiration. I just so recommend reading the book. It was like my own like biography in a way too. You know, all the things that were going on, and you were amazing. I hope to get a chance to work with you as well. And any last things you want to say to everybody?
Well, I'll just say this because it's top of mind right now. I'm reading this book by one of my good friends, John Markoff, who covered cybersecurity for me at the New York Times. It's called Whole Earth, and it's a biography of Stuart Brand. And one of the things that Stuart Brand was behind the Whole Earth catalog, that if you don't know what the Whole Earth catalog is, you do know the phrase, stay hungry, stay foolish, that belonged to Stuart, but Steve Jobs quoted in his sort of famous Stanford commencement speech and has been misattributed to Steve all of these years, but it belonged to Stuart Brand. And when I talked to John, we said, wow, Stuart Brand's really like this high IQ Forrest Gump, who's been there for every major advancement in Silicon Valley. And I kind of feel that way about you, Dave. I kind of feel like you're this high IQ Forrest Gump who's been somehow there for every major cyber attack or APT discovery all along the way. And there I was covering it. And so it's just cool to be having this conversation. And I would love to keep it up.
Okay, next time I'm going to come and I'm going to have a picture of Forrest Gump as my intro. So I got the analogy. Well, listen, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Nicole, thank you for joining, and appreciate everybody coming to NightVision. We'll be posting this whole recording here shortly. And again, hope to see you around soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining. See you, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you.